Good afternoon. I'd like to call the Dare County Board of Education Budget Workshop to order. Today is Wednesday, May 4th, 2022, and we're meeting at First Light High School. The time is 2:01. Before we begin the workshop, I would like to request a motion to approve the agenda, which consists of one item this evening, presentation and discussion of the Dare County School Draft 2022-2023 budget.
Motion, we approve the agenda.
Second.
We have a motion on the floor by Mary Lon, second by Margaret. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. So I'd like to turn the meeting over to Dr. Farley and Ms. Tilley for review.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us for this budget workshop. So as the board knows, we presented the draft budget to the board last month. The purpose of today's workshop is to go through all the details, lots of details, as we go through the state, local, federal funding sources. It also includes the capital improvement plans. The board has previously, as the timing is structured, approved the CIP plan that's gone to the county. We also have the capital outlay budget that's included that we'll review today, the child nutrition program, ASEP, and then student fees. So just as a review on the process, the work in the public school budget is really year-round. There's different waves. When the North Carolina General Assembly and the governor passed the budget, first time we've had a budget in several years, that was welcomed. And in it, it's a biennium budget that was passed, and there's a 2.5% increase for employees in both years. As the board knows, there's been several different bonuses that have come out for teachers and leaders. A lot of that has been really good news and beneficial to our local teachers and our staff. The hub of a lot of the work that is summarized today before the board with all the details really is about a 5-month process starting in December. And we start at the school level where every school team, whether it be 4th grade teachers, the child nutrition department, the school improvement team, gets an opportunity to submit requests. Those requests all go before the school improvement team, and then the principal, with the vote from the school improvement team, sends that up to central office. All of the central office leaders, based upon the departments and their responsibilities, have a similar process. So Dr. Roberts with the Exceptional Children's Program will get all the requests that eventually come up to her. And then we really spend about 6 to 8 weeks in breaking down the requests, bringing principals in for meetings, directors, asking a lot of questions. We study patterns of budgets over 3 or 4 years. Ms. Tilley receives a projected allotment from the Department of Public Instruction, which happens annually. And so all this work leads up to about mid-March, getting in a position where we've finalized our draft. And as the board knows, this year we've also had a couple of 5-on-5 meetings with the county commissioners where we have talked a little bit and a lot of it in some spots about our public school budget requests. And as the board knows, in our last 5-on-5 meeting, we spent a couple of hours with our county officials making a pitch to increase the teacher supplement by $500 per teacher. We have about 450 teachers in the district, and there's not been an increase in several years. And we are excited that the commissioner's been receptive to that, and that is a part of this build. Ms. Tilley is going to go through all the details. We're here to answer any questions that the board may have. If there's a question for a central office leader who's over a certain program, we may ask Ms. Parker, for example, to come up, and that's why we set up the, or Dr. Parker as well. That's why we set up the lectern if needed. So with that, before I turn it over to Candy, Dare County Schools is very fortunate. We have one of the top finance officers in the state, and really the entire department is outstanding. And so we're really proud of the work. And Candy has been going about 18 hours a day for about 3 months and getting the finish line with this, and I can't thank her enough for all the work she does. Candy?
Thank you, Dr. Farley. Chairman Twitty, Vice Chairman Bothwell, before you is a proposed budget, and I want to stress that in that it'll change several times between now and when we actually start the year. And then, as you know, we have monthly budget amendments, and it'll change throughout the year. This budget is, you have a summary sheet. I just want to go over that a little bit so that that'll take care of what I perceive as some of the questions about why there are some changes. In the current fiscal year, we were budgeted or allotted by DPI at ADM of 5,320. As we all know, that is not our true ADM. But because of the pandemic, we were held harmless, and so we received that amount of money from the state. We are projecting that we'll only have 5,171 ADM. That is much more in line with where our true numbers are for student enrollment. So I do feel like this is a really good estimate as of where we're at right now.
And the 5,100 is about where we've been in overall ADM on average for about the last 10 years or so.
To be clear, so the state is giving us money based on 5320?
No, that was this
Previous
year.
year.
This year.
That's current year.
Okay.
They're giving us, well, as it stands right now, we will be allotted at the 5,171 ADM.
Okay.
Yes. I was just making a note because you will see when we go through, there will be some decreases.
Right.
And that's why the current budget is set with more money in it because of the higher ADM.
Right.
And even though we're having significant benefit increases and their salary increases built in, you will see some stuff go down.
Thank
And
you.
the held harmless part of this is, so when DPI has a formula, they use census data, look at trends in school enrollment over the course of time. They've got some magic formula and how they produce those numbers. The held harmless part of this is we were held harmless last year, but typically every single year, so DPI may say, we expect you to have 5,300 students in Dare County schools come the 1st of September, and we're going to fund you because they allot teachers based upon the number of students that you have in the district. However, if you get into school and you get into the 1st of October and only 5,200 students have shown up and are on roll versus the 5,300, they take that money back.
That's kind of the point I was making, is
Right.
that we're basing our numbers on what we,
We're basing our
51.
numbers based on what DPI plans to allot us as of the beginning of the year. Based on where we've been, as Dr. Farley mentioned, over the last 10 years, I think that is a good estimate.
right. But there's been times where it hasn't aligned and we're kind of.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Last year, my estimate was like 5,089 or something like that, and then they were saying 5,320 because of their formula that includes the birth rates, like Dr.
Right.
Farley mentioned. And so, but no, I think this is a good number.
Okay.
Looking at where our ADM has been each month since, this school year.
Right.
So we're
you.
conservative. What you don't want to do is fund enough teacher positions for the 5,300. You get to October 1st, there's
And
only
you gotta come up
5,100
with the
kids,
money.
and they're pulling money back. So
Right.
then you've already employed teachers, you've made decisions.
Right.
So we always try to fund at what our
Conservative.
accurate numbers and projections are versus DPI's. And that's a much more conservative and frugal approach to spending and
Yeah.
is, honestly wise.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Local funding, as you all know, is based on a formula. Based on the formula this year, we're anticipating a $1.2 million increase from the county. In this budget, I have incorporated the requested $250,000 for the supplement increase. If the county were to say, no, sorry, we're not going to fund that, the revenues and expenses would go down proportionately, the same amount, okay? We are seeing a rise in fines and forfeitures. That has courts back in session. They're doing regular court, and so fines and forfeitures have increased this year. And we do anticipate that to happen in the following year. Federal funding. This is projected at a 2.8% decrease, and that is the difference in the 5320 ADM we had this year and the 5171 we're projecting for next year. I wanted to bring, we've talked about this several times when we've had budget workshops, but this budget, 82% of this budget is personnel cost. And so as we see salary increases and benefit increases, that's why you're going to see significant increases in our budget presentation. As Dr. Farley said, the certified salaries are based on what was put in the biennium budget, as well as a 2.5% increase for classified staff. In addition to the 2.5%, they have to make a minimum of $15 an hour. This year, the minimum was $13 an hour, and yes, we do have staff that are not at that minimum. Since I've been here, we've not really had a good set of salary scales, so we felt like this was a good opportunity to look at our salary scales, looking at years of experience for our staff. Since we're going to have to make them at a minimum of a 15, let's go ahead and do the work for that. So we did. So this budget includes that. For instance, a TA that maybe had been working for us for 5 years made the same thing as a TA that was being hired because we didn't have a good salary scale in place. We are making that right in this budget. So somebody that's been working for us for 5 years will now be put on a higher step than someone that's just coming in brand new. The retirement rate. The retirement rate, and this is all based on the biennium budget. So as you know, General Assembly goes back in. If they make any changes in short session, then this all changes. But this is based on what we know as of right now. The retirement rate is increasing to 24.19%, and health insurance is increasing over 5%. Just out of curiosity, because we always talk about salary increases, and we have to educate principals lots of times when they're planning for personnel, you've got to account for those benefits. They're very expensive. So out of curiosity, I was like, okay, a beginning teacher coming in 22, 23, what's their benefit? And I was shocked. I had to do the calculations 3 times. But based on the salary scales in the current biennium budget, a beginning teacher is slated to make $35,920. That's their salary. Their benefit package is 52% of their salary. So that $35,000 salary becomes a $55,000 cost to the school system. And so I was like, okay, that's a beginning teacher. Let's look at somebody that's been here a while. Master's, nationally board teacher, 25 plus years of experience, salary $65,100. Their benefits will be 43%. So then we're into $85,000 cost. So when we talk about salary increases and benefit increases, it hits the pocketbook of the school system. So just wanted to share that information. Like I said, I was even shocked at a 52% benefit. Normally, in my career, industry standard, 30%. If you've got a salary, add 30%, and that'll cover your benefits. And we've gotten to a point where that's not the case anymore. So I just wanted to
Quick
share
question on that. What's included in that benefits? Is that just retirement and what else?
It's the 7.65% for FICA, the 24.19% for retirement, and $7,397 per employee for hospitalization next year.
Cool, thanks.
You're welcome.
One other question about the retirement, but that doesn't matter if they're teaching here or in Currituck or any other place.
That's correct.
That's
That
right.
is a
That's
state, if you're a state employee, that's exactly right.
Are those all state guidelines or
That's correct.
requirements?
That is correct.
Okay.
Versus, say, a state like Virginia, where it's county by county. They don't have the same structure and system that North Carolina has. So you could work in one county in Virginia and be a 5-year teacher and make $42,000, and maybe in a next door county where you're making $47,000. That doesn't happen in North Carolina.
Okay, any other questions about just the overall summary? All right, well, let's go ahead and just dive in. Starting with revenues. The state has formulas that they determine how we're given teachers, how we're given dollar allotments like EC, AIG. They have position allotments, the teachers, the classroom teachers. You hear us refer to the O1 positions. I have taken the formulas for the current fiscal year and applied that with our new ADM, and that's where this revenue comes from. So the $36 million is based on estimates, based on the formulas that are put out by DPI for the current year. DPI has not put out planning allotments yet. They're usually really late, not in enough time for us to have budget presentations based on by statute, we have to have it to the county by May 15th, so.
Candy, will you highlight what a planning allotment is, please?
I'm sorry. Yes, it's just what they estimate that we will receive. So doing basically what I'm doing, the difference is sometimes they will build in some of the benefit cost. And, sorry, you're fine.
Fly swatter, someone?
When the attorney slaps the table, that's a little unnerving, I'm just saying. Okay, where were we? The planning allotments, they'll put out based on what the ADM is. They should be really close. They actually released one just last week, and I was about $2,000 less than what they had said. So that's really good because that's a conservative estimate on our part. So if we get more, great. But we don't want to over budget. And so the planning allotments are something that they put out based on their formulas and just let us know this is what we think you're going to get based on your ADM or your projected ADM. Federal grants, same thing. They'll give us planning allotments so that we can prepare the plans that have to go into place so that we can get the funding in. And as you know, federal government's on a different fiscal year than what we're on, and so some of those plans aren't due until the end of our fiscal year, and they start October 1, and so we're dealing with a couple of different fiscal years based on our funding sources. The local operating, where it says county appropriation, that does include the formula as well as the requested additional amount of money for the supplements. So as I mentioned earlier, if the county were not to approve that in their budget, then that would be reduced. I also mentioned.
Excuse me one second.
Sure.
So that's the new adjusted proposal account, or proposal?
Correct. That includes the formula and the $250,000 for supplements.
The state funding formula is different than what our county,
Oh, yes, absolutely.
yeah.
Very different.
Just wanted to make, like,
I
understand, I want to make sure everybody understands that.
Every formula with the state is different.
Is different than what
Yes.
the agreements that we have with the
Yes,
county. Yeah.
Yes. I mentioned the fines and forfeitures being increased. The pre-K grant, we are anticipating level funding for that. That may go up. At this point, that's all we've been told. We haven't received any planning allotments from them. Interest, as we all know personally, that's gone down, and so I've shown that at a reduction. Use of facilities. We've had a couple of years without a lot of use of facilities. I put $80,000 in there. That's a typical year for us. As we start to see ourselves come out of the pandemic, hopefully that will be a good estimate. But the nice thing about this is, again, it's got corresponding expenses. If we don't rent the facilities, we don't have the expenses associated with it for having people to clean the buildings, be here to operate the lights and the sound. And so I feel like that's a good estimate. Indirect cost, that's a significant increase for us, but that's because of the increase in federal funding. We're receiving a lot more federal funding than what we have in the past, and we're able to take our indirect cost rate, apply that to the federal funding, not all federal funds, but most, and put that into the local budget to offset the expenses of people like myself and my department who have to process all of that federal document, the extra compliance requirements for federal funding. Miscellaneous income. I was asked about this prior to the meeting, and I said I would get to it. This includes several different things. It includes driver's ed funding that are paid by the parents, Medicaid, the tuition that we receive from students that come into the district that are from out of county, our sales tax refund. School systems are allowed to receive 2% of the sales tax back at the end of the fiscal year. Student fees, which is the laptop insurance fees that everyone's charged for the Chromebooks. As you all know, we have an agreement with COA to have a liaison. That includes the funding that comes from them, as well as the DEF position that we share to help with the Run Hill Ridge maintenance. The GovTV grant that we get a little bit of money from scrap metal that that maintenance takes to the scrapyard. Digital designs, let's see, Cisco, we have some space at the transportation department where Cisco parks a truck, and they've been paying like a facility rental amount of money prior to my arrival. It's been here for several years, and so, and we also entered into an agreement with a company called Digital Design. It allows us to pay vendors who will accept a credit card as payment, and we get a rebate back on that. And we just implemented that this year, and we've received $5,000 to date. It doesn't cost us anything. The fees are through the people using the credit card, and so that's been very well received from our vendors because they get their money next day. They're not having to wait for the mail, and it provides us with a small revenue source.
So is that payments to vendors being things you may have ordered? and
Yes.
Stuff like that? So, okay. Because I was trying to think of somebody trying to just swipe to pay for something.
No.
but it's-
We do not have point of sale.
Okay.
No. It is, it's almost like a ACH. Our financial software allows us to pay ACH, which is just like a direct deposit to an employee. So we have that as an option because some people don't accept credit cards, or they charge you a fee if you use a credit card to pay. Yeah. So we do not, the company that we contract with, they do not, if they go through, they do all the vetting for that, and they say, okay, this company charges 3% to pay by credit card, then we don't select them. But it's for anything. I mean,
Okay.
I'm trying to think. I believe Brame, which is a company that we use for custodial supplies. I believe BSN Sports, which we buy some of our athletic equipment, uniforms from.
Oh, okay.
And
Nice.
all we do is, it's an electronic
Yeah.
credit card. Yeah. Any other questions on revenues before?
I have one question.
Sure.
If I heard you correctly, you were talking about indirect costs and how the government was given some additional funding this year compared to last year?
Well, with the ESSER money, that's all federal money, and so we're allowed to charge indirect cost on that.
Okay, but my question in that is that when that money increased, I suspect there was additional things that had to be done associated with that money?
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean,
So, and in that, just a question to make sure I'm clear, is that gets screened as to let you know what the different stipulations and stuff are with that money. So when you get that, you know what's coming along with saying you're taking that money, correct?
when you can charge indirect cost, you are able to take very restricted federal dollars and turn it into local unrestricted dollars. So then, if we have federal money that is paying for staff, materials and equipment or whatever, and we have an indirect cost rate that is provided to us by DPI. Currently, ours is 4.079, I believe. So we're able to charge that on federal dollars, and then we receive that as local revenues into our budget. So then that allows us to say, pay for my staff, give me money that my staff can go to training to learn how to manage all of this federal money that's been, quite frankly, thrown at us in a very short amount of time. There's a lot of compliance with those federal dollars. And so it gives us the opportunity to, like I said, take that money where it's got a specific, very specific use and put it into our local budget to offset the cost associated with processing all of that. You know, right, we brought in 24 additional people. Sandy and her staff, that's 24 more people that had to be processed through her department. And so it just gives us administrative costs.
An
locally.
example of that with the number of staff members that we brought on board recently through grant funding, then as Candy's saying, it helps us to administer the additional, we're paying for them out of the grant monies. So for example, all of the background checks that we normally pay locally, so we can use some of that money that would go towards that, but it's all about administration of the grant itself. And we do this all the time with our Title I federal programs because, again, there's certain compliance pieces that have to be put in place, and this allows us to be able to kind of pull some of that money in and be able to use it to help with the administration costs.
Thank you.
Okay, page 4, if you want to go start with classroom teachers. Classroom teachers, that program is a position allotment. Regardless of how much someone makes, whether they're a beginning teacher or a veteran teacher at the end of their career, they cost us one position. So that's why you see positions funded in addition to the funding. So we think, based on the estimates, that it'll be 23 million needed for those positions. It could be more, it could be less. We just have to stay within our position allotment. The state positions, they decreased. Of course, our ADM dropped. We lost 7.5 positions as a result of that drop. And then we will move, and we'll get into this later, with dual language immersion, we're moving 6 positions. They come out of this and go into dual language immersion because there's a conversion of that's how the revenue supports the program. We'll talk about that later. The local positions have gone up, the ADM drop. And then we do have 2 positions in here anticipated for growth. When you look at the total amount of our ADM, that may be staying level, but that may not be staying level in each grade based on how we're funded. And so classroom sizes have to be monitored K-3, and we're expecting some classroom size issues at Cape Hatteras Elementary as well as Manio Elementary in the coming fiscal year. So we have put into this budget a position at Cape Hatteras Elementary as well as a position at Manio Elementary. Now, that is something that we review, but that is something that the principals have brought to us. So that becomes part of, as Dr. Farley mentioned, their budget request to us. We're thinking we're going to have this number of kids in, say, first grade. We don't have enough teachers to cover that and make all the other class sizes correct, so we're going to need an additional position. And so we look at that very closely to make sure that that matches what we're seeing and before we put it in here.
And there's also moving targets, particularly with kindergarten, because a lot of parents will not register their students until the summer. So the registration today may look very different in 3 or 4 months. That's a typical grade level where you see the most movement.
Okay. Central office administration, that is central office. That is Dr. Farley, Sandy, myself. You do see a decrease here. That is, of course, some savings from some positions where people are leaving through attrition. Others, for instance, we had John Donlin in. He worked 6 months. He was in the original budget. He's not, of course, as we move forward. So, because we had some overlapping where he was training with Dr. Castillo. So there's a small decrease there, and that's just through attrition and moving positions. Savings from that. Non-instructional support. This is a dollar allotment, and you will notice that it has gone up significantly. There are 2 positions in here. One is for the Manio High School receptionist, a 10-month position that was requested. We did a time period without a receptionist there, tried to spread the work amongst the office staff there, and quite frankly, it hasn't worked well. And so the principal requested a receptionist. We looked at that and added that to the budget. Additionally, there is an entry-level accountant position. This was discussed with you a couple of months ago for my department to assist in bringing us back up to where we were. We had 5 department members at one time. We've down to 4, got a great team, but we do need some extra support, especially in light of all the additional funding. And there's been a lot of compliance issues, compliance requirements as with all of this additional funding. Again, as I mentioned earlier, salary scale. So this is where our custodians are housed. This is where our office staff are housed. We have a maintenance. So a lot of this is our classified staff are in here. And so that $15 minimum and the new salary scales are built into this budget. The next page is a position allotment as well. That was new this year. They are taking K-5 program enhancement teachers, which are your music, art, PE, and you're getting a position allotment. That is the only positions that can be paid from here. And so no grade 6 and up, no secondary program enhancement teachers come from here, and they have to all be paid out of 01. So that was, came about several years ago from some discussions about class sizes and looking at teacher allotments and reducing those, and it was a big thing at the state level. And so they did this to break it out and give you an allotment just for those program enhancement teachers. You will notice we're staying the same. The next is school building level administration. These are our principals and our APs. Again, you'll see a decrease in the state, an increase in local, and that's because of the decrease in the ADM. No real changes other than the salary information. School psychologist. This was implemented, a new PRC implemented this year. These positions, there's 2 positions that were allotted. That is not additional. It came from the next PRC, which is 007, which is instructional support, which is where guidance, psychologists, speech language, different positions of that nature were at. They reduced us by 2 positions in that allotment and then added it to this allotment. My assumption is that it has something to do with SEL. I don't know if one of you guys knows anything more than that, but trying to track with all of the mental health issues that have come out of the COVID pandemic, trying to monitor that these school systems have psychologists in place. Not all school districts have psychologists on staff. Instructional support. Again, we saw a decrease because of our ADM drop. There, you'll notice there's a position decrease. That is not, we are not eliminating a position. That position got moved to at-risk. There was available funding there, and so we moved a guidance counselor into our at-risk funding, which we'll get to later. But this pot of money pays for social workers, librarians, speech pathologists, psychologists, and guidance counselors. Again, it doesn't matter while we have a dollar amount associated with this, it's more about staying within the position allotment, not the dollar amount. Next is employee benefits. This is where we have to pay out annual leave balances, any bonus leave that somebody that's retiring has accumulated over a period of time, and they have to be paid out of the source from which they are paid. So state is a guaranteed allotment, and with that, if this year we have $200,000 in payouts, and next year we have $700,000 in payouts, it doesn't matter. We're guaranteed that funding, and so this is an estimate based on where we're at as of today. It could change, but that's okay because the state portion DPI picks up, and we are very conscientious of who's resigned or retired, and making sure that if they can be paid with state funding, that's where they're paid from. That's so that we get that benefit of the state picking up that tab. Driver's training. We are anticipating an increase of 51. That's based on the allotment of ninth graders that we're seeing. And we charge a fee of $65. That's the local funds that I mentioned earlier that were in miscellaneous. And we get some funding from the state as well. And we use that to pay the contractors to provide the services. CTE, months of employment. Again, we're given an allotment of months of employment. One teacher is a 10-month employee. Some of our career development coordinators are 11-month, and so that's how this is budgeted based on what their employment is. It looks like a significant increase. It is not. We were originally allotted 295 months of employment in the current fiscal year. But you have the ability to move that money to program support if you're not using all of the allotments. We have had, unfortunately, we had a death of one of our CTE teachers, and so we went a couple of months with that not being filled. So as people leave or we have months where we can pay for a sub that doesn't go against your months of employment. They still pick up the tab for the sub, but it doesn't go against your months of employment. And so when we see savings like that, we're able to take those months of employment and put them into program support to offset costs that are needed to operate the CTE program.
How do you decide who's on a 10-month or a 12 or 11-month?
All of the teachers are basically 10-month. The career development coordinators are 11-month because of the paperwork and some of the stuff that they need to do prior to the teacher's arrival and the student's arrival. So they get anybody that, I say 11-month, I should say 10 plus 1 because there is a distinction there. So a 10 plus 1, they get half of a month in August before we start the regular calendar year, and they get half of a month in June after we end that last work
To
day.
finish their paper year.
It's just to finish up the paperwork and get prepared in August for the kids to come back. Moving to the next one, the CTE Program Support. As I mentioned, we have moved a significant amount of money into there. When we move the months of employment, it's based at the average CTE salary for the LEA. Well, it looks like we're having a significant decrease in that program. That is not actually the case. We're actually anticipating a little bit of an increase. So, and that, when you look at that and you go back to the CTE months of employment at a state level, and we've talked about how the ADM's gone down, you have to think about how CTE is just 6 through 12, and them looking at those numbers. So those numbers must be staying pretty steady when we look at the ADM over each grade level. So that's, even though the total ADM may have gone down from what we were allotted this year, that's why it could be staying level or actually increasing.
So you're assuming then that this probably will change? It won't be such a huge decrease?
The decrease is because we moved 26 months of employment into this in the current year. We had lapsed salary where teachers weren't in place for a period of time for whatever reason. And so we're able to convert those months into program dollars. And so this year we've moved 26 months into into PRC 14. So the budget's like $300,000. But when we started the year, the budget was only $85,000. So that additional $220,000 has come from moving months of employment. So typically, we have more months of employment than we have teachers, and that's how we fund the program to be able to provide the supplies needed for the programs, whether it be food for the culinary arts class, or I know this year we were able to buy some mannequins for the health service classes, so different items like that. Does that make sense? Okay. People think it's very easy. It's complicated.
Well, especially when you're talking about the difference between a dollar amount and a position amount, and it doesn't always add up.
Correct.
And so you're talking about, yeah.
Yeah. And a position in our district is different from what a position would be in a neighboring district, what the value of it is. So, yes.
Which is what makes her so valuable, because it is a moving target, and she's always trying to maximize what the allowable expenses for, especially for that 80+% of our budget. So she's the best.
CTE, compared to a lot of programs, is very well funded historically.
Yes. If you flip to the next page is another pot of program money for CTE. This is set apart in that this federal money must be used for new and expanding programs. So if it's something we've been doing for the last 10 years, we cannot use this pot of money. However, if we're planning to offer a new course in one of the pathways, then we can use this funding to buy the materials that we need to offer that new course. And this is the one pot of federal money we received that's on a July to June year and has to be spent by June. Most of our other money, while we'll have some in June, it's actually carryover. And so it has, you have till September 30th. There's usually we got a little time that the federal money will roll over, but this money, it is July to June. We have to spend it. And I have to say that Shannon has been very intentional as she's worked through her pathways and programs and in making sure that she's used this money for that so that we could make sure we could spend all of it.
Quick question. So this is for expanding CTE programs, correct?
Yes, but it doesn't have to be like, okay, we're offering health services, and now, we were talking about this earlier, cosmetology. You know, it doesn't have to be that new and expanding. It can be that we're offering some type of Adobe class, and then we switch and we offer, and you know what more about that than I do, but some other type of Adobe class. Like we offer a totally different course in that pathway for those students.
Okay, so, okay, that makes sense. I mean, I just wanted to, are we expanding? Are we putting some new program out there,
It can expand the offerings within those pathways as well, and, enhancements for the programs.
Yes.
Thanks.
The next one is, the official title is International Faculty Exchange. This is where our dual language immersion program is housed. As I mentioned, this budget includes converting 6 positions to add the grade levels at each of the schools that offer dual language. In preparing for today, I'm like, okay, and I knew the 6, but I'm like, when you stop and think about it, sometimes you get so involved in doing the work that you don't stand back and look at the big picture. Why 6 teachers when there's only 5 schools that offer dual language? We are setting the pipeline so that we have co-teachers in place so that when we add next year, they will be in place to continue the program. We were not able to bring in faculty and staff from other areas during COVID. The borders were shut down, that type of thing. And so we hired some bilingual TAs. And through attrition, as those people have decided to leave or move into other positions, that's how we are moving in to have these 6 positions.
And just before you move on there, so North Carolina is very unique. There's a general statute that's been in place for several years with international teachers. Every time a district hires an international teacher, we do not have to pay for the benefits package that Candy summarized in earlier comments. So that allows us to have a $15,000 to $18,000 cost savings every time you hire an international teacher. And North Carolina started this probably 15 or 20 years ago at the time, because they would hire international teachers, say, to teach a Spanish class or a French class. And then it's expanded over time with international teachers, such as the program that we have in Dare County Schools with dual language immersion. So the cost savings adds up dramatically, which helps pay for the program support. So in many ways, the program is cost neutral because you're saving so much and not having to pay for benefits.
Thank you. Next is Disadvantaged Students Fund. This funding we actually use to pay for our one of our 12-month social workers, as well as a guidance counselor at one of our elementary schools. Teacher assistants, again, that is, you see an increase there. Going back, the $15 minimum, trying to get our teacher assistants on a scale on their correct step for payment. Professional development, hopefully in the coming year, we will be able to bring back our Ignite conferences that have been very well received by the staff. And so this is to cover the cost of, we have this app that we purchase that allows people to register. I believe it allows them to do their CEUs, and it's really cool platform. It's like when you go to a conference, very sophisticated, and that allows us to have that app as well as other supplies for providing the training that are just needed in the course of providing training for our entire district.
So we've saved a significant amount of money in the last 3 or 4 years. A lot of school districts pour hundreds of thousands of dollars into professional development. Now, we're very unique in how remote we are, so it's very difficult for us. Pre-COVID, a lot of the state conferences are in Raleigh or Winston-Salem, Forsyth, or Durham. And what we decided to do is to, and to the benefit of the teachers, but also a significant cost savings, is to really focus in on providing our own professional learning library and options locally. And so the conferences are certainly two pathways that we provided teachers: full day professional learning taught by Dare County specialists versus bringing in speakers or presenters and so on and so forth. And then it also, part of our focus, and this actually helped us immediately when we transitioned, when we had to go to the virtual platform in March of 2020, was we've created a library of probably 150 to 200 different subject areas and teaching strategies that teachers can access and earn CEUs or credits for extending their professional learning, and it's self-paced. So a lot of districts will provide professional learning, say, from 3 to 5 after school, and we've tried to get away from that model so that a teacher could do it at their own pace, not have to stay till 5 o'clock. When you're exhausted, maybe do it during a planning period, or depending upon your style. And so you can see that costs locally for professional learning are slim to none. And that's been intentional and very well received. And to Candy's point, every time that we have a professional learning opportunity in the district, we survey teachers, we get feedback, and whenever we've held an Ignite conference, we've gotten about 97% positive return rate. So our teachers appreciate it. And then we try to do extras for most of the conferences. We have 50 to 65 teachers who present, and it gives them a really good opportunity in a leadership role. And so it's been fantastic and inexpensive.
Moving to the next, PRC, we're on page 20, PRC 29. This is a grant fund. We have to request this. We can't do that until after the start of the school year, but it does go retroactive to July 1. So this is based on current year funding. That's our best guess at this time, and that we'll get level funding from them. But it has paid for a teacher assistant, and 70% of our behavior liaison.
And so, yeah, this is a source where you may start school, and then in November a special needs child comes in who may have to have a one-on-one assistant or special equipment that you didn't anticipate at the start of the school year. So fortunately, the state has provided us an opportunity to apply for this funding, and that's why it can come at various points in time.
Next is children with special needs. This is based on our population of special needs. The percentage used to be 12.75%, I believe, like that was your cap of your ADM. They did increase that last year to 13%, which is helpful to us because you'll notice at the bottom, our percentage of EC students to our total ADM is almost 14%. We are proposing in this budget to increase one speech language pathologist from 60% to 80%, and another one who was retired and has decided not to come back next year. So she was only part-time at 47%, increasing that to 100%. And then to offset that, we're cutting back on the contracted services for speech language pathology.
So contracted services is when you outsource the support as opposed to having someone who's internal within the school system in a position.
This money is not only for personnel, but it does cover other aspects as far as supplies needed in the classrooms, equipment. If there's adaptive equipment that's needed for a student, we have to provide that. Anything that's put in an IEP, if there's anything special, then we have to pay for that out of, we have to pay for that. I don't know that they care where the funding comes from, but we try to take care of it with our exceptional children money. Charter schools. We are very fortunate in Dare County in that we don't really have a physical charter school other than the one that's in Corolla. And honestly, that population, 2 of the kids were siblings. They moved into Corolla, so they dropped off of our list. So currently we have 12 students at Water's Edge. And then we have 16 students in 2 virtual charter schools. And I base the numbers on this projection on where we're at today. We do have 1 student who is in a legal guardian situation, so lives in Durham County. And because they are a student listed with a DSS address, then we are responsible for that, and we're paying for that one student to attend a physical charter in Durham County. So right now, we have 29 students in physical charters, and that is a decrease from what we saw last year. The next PRC is the school safety grants. The decrease is due to the special safety grant we received this year for the access that we mentioned in a couple of board meetings ago. But we do typically get funding to assist with the cost of the Nags Head Elementary School SRO, which is provided by the town of Nags Head. They invoice us for what the finance officer for the town of Nags Head and I communicate, and she invoices me for what his total cost is, and I pay whatever our grant is from the state. And so the town of Nags Head is very generous in that matter. They provide the rest in kind.
And as the board knows, we're one of the few districts in the state that has an SRO in every single school. Very fortunate.
Next is preschool handicap. We pay for a 30% of a speech language pathologist out of this funding that specifically services our preschool EC population. This is federal funding, and so that's why you'll see the decrease in the funding. Title I, I will say that I did not, this is just what I think the allotment will be. I did not, yes, I did. I apologize. I was going to tell you I didn't put in the carryover, but I did. The carryover is in there. We use this money at our 4 Title I schools, which are all elementary. We're set up as a school-wide, Sandy helps, thank you, school-wide services. I know just enough about some of the program side to be dangerous sometimes. But we pay for teachers, TAs. We use this for remediation. We use some of this to help pay for the snacks with NC Pre-K. And that's part of the set-asides. There's this very complicated formula that Sandy and I work through at the beginning of the year every year. And that determines how much each school that is a Title I school receives. And we have to stay within the order based on their ranking, based on their population of poverty students that live in poverty.
Sandy, can you summarize how a school qualifies for Title I status, please?
Sure, and she doesn't give herself enough credit, because I'm telling you, most people don't understand as much as she knows. In order to determine how much money that a Title I eligible school would receive, it has to do with looking at the free and reduced lunch numbers that we've had that have been kind of stagnant for the last couple of years because of the pandemic. We have received free lunches across the board. So that's coming to an end this year. DPI would allow us to be, they held us harmless and kept us to the same level for each of the schools' free and reduced lunch percentage for the last year that we had full data, which was 2019. So taking that percentage and applying it to the average daily membership at each of the schools then gives us a percentage, and then that percentage is applied to the leftover money within the grant that is not required for the set-asides, and then those monies are doled out towards this, to each of the individual schools that qualify. In order to be a school-wide program, as we were talking about, that is at least a minimum of 40% free and reduced lunch percentage at the school level. So all of our, well, 4 of our 5 schools are eligible for that. The program does not extend beyond, we could, but it kind of lessens the impact of the money. We have some of our secondary schools that may be eligible for those funding sources. However, when we start splitting the baby 9 ways instead of 4 or 5 ways, the money doesn't have the same kind of impact. We have a program that is an early intervention model, so we invest heavily at the elementary school, and we then try to support students that may be academically at risk early on so that we can help resolve those deficits before they even reach the middle or high school. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. Does that help?
Yeah, and so to Sandy's point, the positions that are in Title I are typically those literacy specialists who are working in elementary schools, who can a lot of times provide double down literacy instruction. And then the other benefit for what we've done in the last year with our interventionists is we've been able to add additional, so they're essentially literacy interventionists, but with the additional 20 school-based positions that we use through the federal ESSER funding, we've been able to provide each school with 2 additional interventionists who've been able to provide additional support to Title I for the schools that do have those positions.
Okay. So to illustrate what Dr. Farley was just saying, in a typical year without the additional interventionists that we have in place, one interventionist or one literacy specialist at an elementary school may be able to serve or touch or be able to provide services to maybe 20, 25 students at a time. So it's limited because if you want to make an impact, it's going to take some time to work intensely with those students. So adding the additional interventionists that provide additional academic support helps to multiply the impact of the number of students that may need support. And that was the whole crux of our plan, is knowing that we would have more kids that needed to have some academic support moving forward.
So when they progress to middle school and high school, that they don't get any of this assistance?
Well, on that,
'Cause
what
we're
we
just keeping
count on
Title
there,
I.
because in addition to the Title I support that this early intervention at the elementary schools, then we also use some of our at-risk funding to be able to provide all schools with an opportunity to have intervention support through tutoring. Either they create their plan. Sometimes they provide additional tutoring support using some of our certified subs during the day, where they can pull them during some of their small group time in the classroom to be able to provide that same kind of support. Sometimes they will schedule a Saturday where they come in for additional tutoring. So the thing about federal programming, and especially for Title I, is it has to supplement what we do for every other school. So it's in addition to. So these funds have to enhance or add more than what we would do for everyone. And it's one of the compliance pieces that we have to monitor very closely.
And the heavy investment in elementary is 'cause the goal is to have every kid reading by 3rd grade. You know, and then we've created our principals do a really good job working with their school improvement teams of creating those remedial opportunities for kids to get some additional instruction, particularly in reading and math in 6-8, or 4-8, really.
Okay. The next page is a limited English proficiency. ESL is what we commonly refer to it as, or I do anyway. This is where our ESL teachers are located that are in the various schools. We also have contracted services in here that we pay for interpretation services for parents and our students. We pay for translation services for some of our district communications so that our Spanish-speaking families can get the same message that our English-speaking families do. And we also have some money built in here for software to assist our ESL students in the academic day. Transportation. It is a moving target. Oh, my gracious. I did reach out to Alex and ask, okay, and trying to anticipate questions, what was the last price you paid on diesel fuel? So $3.60, which is very high for someone that's on a state contract. And he said next week's going to be more. So I guess they're getting a tank load next week. So that is moving up. But this year, as you know, like every other school district in the nation, we had a hard time getting drivers. We actually parked 4 buses this year. And so you'll notice a decline in transportation. That's not taking anything away. That's not not incorporating any increases for fuel. It's actually, we've had a retirement, and so replacing them with cheaper people. And then looking at where we're at right now, taking those 4 buses off the road saves some money. There's repair cost, that type of thing built into that. So transportation, I don't, when the chairman of the board is a former transportation director, you're a little antsy about transportation. So I just don't, I wanted to be sure that when you look at where we're at as of the end of March and annualize that out, they're actually an increase. So I think they're going to be fine. But as always, we know if we can't get them to school, we can't teach them, and we will make sure that transportation has what it needs so that our kids can get to school and receive the academic day.
And one of the outcomes of the pandemic is less ridership. So, but historically, from Mr. Twitty to Mr. Chandler, the school district has been exemplary in the different metrics that have to do with, do you have a very efficient system in how you pick up children? In other words, let's say you're picking up 40 kids, and you may have bus A that may take 1 hour and 20 to pick those kids up based upon the routes, and then you may have bus B that's taking 1 hour and 45. So the state rewards districts with efficiency, and then the other part of that formula is you're much more efficient if you, in how they do the metrics, if you have a bus that is primarily full. So you're in some ways rewarded for a bus that may have 45 students on it versus a bus that may only have 8. So we're very fortunate that we've got a fantastic transportation department. Mr. Chandler and his staff do a great job.
Well, that's because David trained him.
There you go.
But real quick, so just to, and I know this is something that sometimes people get confused on, activity buses, can you talk about how activity buses they're funded differently than the yellow buses, right? Because
Yes.
our local dollars pay.
Right. State funding can only be used for yellow bus transportation to and from school. Sometimes if you're out and about in different areas, you may see a yellow bus doing a field trip, rare, but I think it does happen. And if it does, that's got to be charged back to the local budget. Local budget is used for activity bus use. You cannot use those state dollars for anything but yellow bus.
Does that include salary for?
They have to keep track of it. If that mechanic works on an activity bus, he has to keep track of his time and have almost like a work order of how much did I spend working on this activity bus, how much were the parts that I took out of inventory to fix it. They have to keep track of that, and every month we get a report from Alex, and we have to move those expenses. If they're charged to state, which they typically are just because of, then we do an adjustment at the end of every month.
I think a lot of people confuse like they see Dare County schools on the bus, and so they automatically assume, but there is a big difference in the way that all plays out.
Absolutely. And they have to be very meticulous at the bus garage about how they keep up with that. So. Next is handicap funding, is IDEA funding. It's federal funding for our EC population. We currently are paying for 14 EC teachers out of this funding, and that is what is projected in the next years. Okay. Next is instructional supplies. This is kind of where all of the materials that our students need to assist with their learning. This money entails the amount of money we give to the schools. As Dr. Farley mentioned, the schools submit a request to let us know what they need. But prior to that, we provide them with a target. We look at what the projected ADM is for each school. We calculate an amount for instructional supplies. This district has historically provided state instructional money as well as local instructional money. Currently, we give $30 per ADM out of our state allotment and $25 per ADM at each school for local. They also receive $5 per ADM for library books. This year, We have noticed an increase in the amount of nursing supplies needed. While we're very fortunate in Dare County that our nurses are provided by the county health department, they do have various supplies, Band-Aids, children's Tylenol, various things like that, that is our responsibility to provide. In the past, the schools have been using their local instructional money. They would move it out and say, I need this amount for nursing supplies. So this year, with Dr. Farley's permission, I have included an allotment just for nursing supplies at $1 per ADM. That doesn't sound like a lot, but looking at what they've been spending each year, that's about in line with what they typically spend. We do provide an additional allotment to the middle school and high school for music. They use that for various things, typically buying sheet music. Each school gets office operation funds, and then they get money for very little maintenance, if they need some extra brooms, this custodial staff, anything they need at the school level. And that's allotted based on square footage of the buildings. And then finally, when I started athletics, I couldn't determine what their allotment was. There was real no rhyme or reason to that. And so last year, as we moved into this year, we came up with an allotment so that it's fair and equal based on what people or what schools are providing. And so we give an allotment based on per sport to each school, and they can use that for, and that's local funding, for their athletic teams, whether that be uniforms, equipment, that type of thing.
Candy, on the targets for the individual schools, so when you say ADM, you're meaning per student.
Correct.
So when that, can you just explain a little deeper about, like, so that target per student? Because a lot of people, I don't think, quite understand that each school does not, the way each school individually manages their money. Do you know what understand what I'm saying?
Yes. Well, one thing to note is that while they get allotments from us, they have funds that they receive. From picture sales, if they get grant funds that are directly to the school, then that's housed in their school bank accounts. The money that is given here is based on the ADM that we project.
Meaning the student
Count.
That student count.
Yes, and it is per student, the amount. So whether you're at Cape Hatteras Elementary, projected, and I will say that these projections were done before we had any kind of numbers from DPI. I will not shore them up until we get
Right.
ready to go. But 300 was what was projected at Cape Hatteras Elementary School, and that's K-12. That's something else we have to remember. Pre-K at the elementary schools, you cannot use state funding for that. Our state funding is only K-12 instruction. So K-12 ADM at Cape Hatteras Elementary, they have, I projected 300 ADM at the time and $30 per ADM. So they got $9,000. Kitty Hawk, 450 projected ADM, 13,500. So it's equal based on the ADM. Okay. It is a per student allotment, so that there's no discrepancy of, well, I live in Cape Hatteras and I really like them, so I want them to have
Right.
more.
And ADM, and correct me if I'm wrong, is it the 10 days into the year where that, isn't there like a 10 days, you take the average ADM?
No, you go ahead.
It's actually after the 20th day, then
The
that
20th
kind of
day.
shores things up for the first month's ADM.
Right.
Okay?
Yes.
And then the second month ADM, again, average daily membership.
Right.
Meaning how many kids were enrolled over the course of the month.
Right.
Then the second, it's the best one of two that is counted
That's
in
counted.
terms of all these allocations that Candy's already talked about.
Yeah.
And I think to further that point, she's talking about pots of money that they just get and they have the ability or flexibility to determine how it's used,
Right.
right? similarly, but not quite as flexibly, is we take a look at those class sizes, make a difference in terms of how we allocate those positions to the school. So when we look at each of the individual pots, we look at not only the class sizes, we look across the district to make sure that we're within a reasonable range of each other. Now, kids
Right.
don't come in packages that are
Right.
nice and neat and equal.
Yes.
So there's times when things have to really be balanced out, maybe through other ways. But when you look at the enhancement positions, when you look at all of those things, we try to make sure that it's proportional based on the size of the school's population.
right.
Okay?
Yeah, thank you.
So the first, I want to go with this a little bit deeper, just so you guys know what, so the first line, the instructional supplies and textbooks, that does include the school targets that we mentioned. We have been typically spending about $50,000 of our textbooks money on Career and College Promise, the dual enrollment program, and then Chromebook cases are in there. The next two lines, as I mentioned when discussing the targets, are straight allotments to the schools. And computer equipment, that is for Chromebooks for the 23-24 year. You'll recall you approved a bid at our last board meeting for Chromebooks so that we can get them in here, be ready to go, and have them set up. That has allowed us to now be using the 22-23 budget to do the same thing. So a purchase order will be done prior to the end of the 23 school year so that we can get the devices in, and then Holly and her team have time to be able to start getting them prepared so the minute that the students walk in the door, we're ready to go. I just think that's very important because that's just a big deal, especially for her team. Contracted services, that's various services that we may need in the technology department. Software and subscriptions, let's see, there's about $70,000 of different subscriptions that we have through at the high level with technology. So it's with Google. I'm starting to get into the areas that I know just enough to be dangerous. But there's some, and I've got a list in my book, but Holly provides, again, the directors provide a request, they let us know what they need and what we have, and quite frankly, these are just things that we have every year. There's nothing really new. She actually had one program we had been using, it was costing us about $50,000. She found something very comparable and knocked it down to like 20. So she's very intentional about trying to get the best price, biggest bang for her buck. But of that $371,000, $300,000 of it basically is for educational software that are used throughout our schools. Repair parts, you see a significant decrease there, and that is because with the new purchase of these Chromebooks, where we've got ourselves sitting at this point in time, with the warranties on the Chromebooks, we're not going to have the repair costs that we've had in the past. We can send them off and they fix them, and that's all part of the agreement when we purchase the devices. And then finally, Telecommunications Services is our internet stuff. At risk. I mentioned this earlier. We did move a guidance counselor in here that had originally been paid for out of a position allotment with state funds. At risk is state funds as well, but we did move that position into this allotment. This allotment covers our homebound services as well as our AVID program. When Sandy mentioned earlier about our Title I intervention remediation funds being a supplement to what we're already doing, this is where the other remediation services come from. So this is where our high school, middle school, and our elementary still have to receive. They have to get a fair proportionate amount, but this is where that money comes from.
Candy, you have the substitute pay going down by $8,000 or close to that?
Yes. Let me think.
It's just out of this limited funding source. It's not, so this isn't a broad substitute pay drop, just
And-
out of this particular 069 program.
And there's maybe, I'd have to look it up. I didn't write it down specifically. There might be one or two teachers in here, and I think there's only two teachers. There's more TAs. We have TAs that cover our ISS, and so they're in here, but I believe there's only two TAs, and I try and allot $1,000 for sub pay, and that's pretty generous there. So but there's other funding sources. If you go back to PRC 03, there's significant sub money there. The next allotment is a special allotment. We had an employee who was recruited to be a district or a state level position. It's like a shared position. Educator on loan is what they call it. And what they do is DPI gives us an allotment, a position allotment for that person. Part of the deal is we have to still provide her with the benefits that we would if she were still our employee. And it is a 12-month position, so that's why it's, when you look at the position, it's 1.2. Because as I mentioned earlier, a position is typically, one position is a 10-month position. And she's been doing this for, I think this is the 3rd year.
I have a quick question. When you say special position, what is that special position? Yeah, what is that?
That's Sandy's
Well,
realm.
I can help maybe. Molly Holloman was the librarian over at Manio Elementary School, and literally worked so closely with the folks at DPI that, they kind of recruited her for a special digital technology kind of enhancement position. So she works with our staff and providing training and working with teachers to enhance their skills with working with technology tools. But then she also then travels to other districts within our region to provide them with kinds of support too. So we're fortunate to be able to keep her in our district because she was so awesome and still is. But we have to share her with others in our region, and that's her new position. She actually works out of DPI, but stays housed here in our district.
And so she helps all the schools.
Yes, yes.
So the advantage is you're keeping a superstar employee who's still working with the district, who's getting exposure and professional learning opportunities across the state, and then there's a benefit for her still to be in the school system, both short-term while she's performing in that role, and then hopefully we can retain her when she decides, or doesn't, that she doesn't want to do the dual role. So it's very advantageous for us.
Next is improving teacher quality. This is where we pay, there's a teacher that is paid from this allotment, that when this funding was originally available, it helps with our classroom sizes. Additionally, we use this funding to pay for our mentors that mentor our beginning teachers. And we do have a significant amount of workshop expense in here, and that is to help our teachers, especially with our beginning teachers, with some of the professional development they need as they start their careers. Next is Title IV funding. This pays for a portion of one of our social workers. This funding is broken into 3 different categories: well-rounded education, improving school conditions for student learning, and improving the use of technology. They are very specific about how much can be spent on each one. For instance, technology, no more than 15%, I believe, can be spent on technology. We have a maximum of like $40,000 that can be spent on the social worker, and then the remainder is for improving school conditions. And so, as I mentioned, we do pay for a portion of one of our social workers from here, and then we have done some professional development with our dual language teachers, and what else? And beginning teacher workshops.
Yes, and that was curriculum work. They're creating curriculum maps
next
and
year.
resources, and so that's part of that particular component. So it enhances the education of our students at the elementary school. And we're actually pulling in now some of our folks with the ESL population too, so that's going across the board for all schools. And then, of course, the technology, we've used the funding for that to be able to help with creation of some of the online modules that allow for teachers to have on-demand choices that they can take small bites of professional learning that interests them and be able to create those modules and make them accessible to everyone. So it's a great mix of use of this fund that we get.
The professional learning needs of the beginning teachers are much more intense. So there's a heavy emphasis, particularly in the first year.
The next PRC is 171, which is our Sr2 funding. This does pay for 3 of the MTSS coordinators, actually for 2 years, as this funding will expire in September 30th of 2023. Additionally, we have used this funding with our summer programming and plan to do that in the coming year. There is a reduction, but that's a natural reduction in that we received the money and we're using it as we go. There's not going to be any additional funding. Once it's gone, it's gone. And my goal is to have it spent by the end of June 30th of 2023, so we do not have to carry it over for just 3 months into the 23-24 year. Next is the Sr3 Emergency Relief Fund, PRC 181. This is the other year of our 3 MTSS coordinators is budgeted here, as well as the 24 positions that we've referenced throughout this year that we brought on board, the school level positions that are the reading and math interventionist. Again, the reduction is natural as these funds, what we've received is what we've received. Once they're gone, they're gone. These funds do extend until September 30th of 2024. Pre-K, as I mentioned when we were discussing revenues, we are anticipating level funding for that. You will notice that if you look at the bottom, the state grant, you were like, well, you say level funding, but it dropped. We were given in November an additional about $13,000. And so that's not something that's guaranteed. That was just a surprise allotment, and we get those, sometimes we get those a lot. And it's nice, but we just don't want to we don't want to project that we will receive that again. This pays for our 8 classrooms that are serving 134 children. We have, Sandy, can I defer to you on about the rates and how why we support this locally, because it is a need in our community and it's something that we feel helps, but with the rate and how we have that set up.
I'll do my best on this one. It's been a little while since I've dug into this personally, but while the allotment comes to us, the grant, it's given to us in a lump. It's not actually drawn down until the students actually attend the classes. There's an eligibility process to determine the risk factors for students that are eligible to be in this program. Once they're assigned to a classroom, they actually have to attend at least 10 days, at least 10 days of the month in order for us to be able to submit paperwork to say then they will draw down a per student amount. Believe it's about $493, something like that, if I remember. And then that allows us to be able to say, okay, so for like these 10 kids, this is what we get, and then it can go towards the cost of operating the classroom. And typically it's salaries, once again. Any supplies and materials will come out of that. And in some cases, local has to pick up for it because of the fact that it just doesn't come in nice bundles with the kids. One classroom we looked at last year, while it was essentially a half classroom, because it's very strict in terms of the ratios, so it has to have 1 adult for every 9 students in the classroom. We had a classroom of 9 that was being operated with 1 teacher in the classroom, and that was it, preschoolers, God bless her. So being by ourselves during that time, but we had the capacity, we had a classroom that by adding an additional assistant, we opened up additional slots in that classroom, 9 additional slots paid locally, that then we could then go back to the at-risk list and see who could we put in there that might not have normally done it. And if we're already paying the bulk of a salary, it seemed to make sense, and it gave us some flexibility with some students that may not have been directly eligible, but had some serious needs. For example, we placed a student that had some deficits that didn't meet the age requirement, but because we had those slots paid for locally, we were able to make a placement that was a good fit for that student's educational progress. So all in all, that's kind of the ins and outs of how that program works.
Candy, I have one question for you.
Certainly.
If you just go back to page 34, what's the fuel cost associated with in that?
Summer school,
Ah, okay.
if we provide it. That the intent is we may, we just don't, it depends on the number of students that we have. Is it cost effective to put a bus on the road? So that's what that's for.
Okay, thank you.
Also, Sandy,
Candy and Sandy sound an awful alike. And I thought,
I'll-
oh my God,
I'll
he's
try to
asking me about
enunciate
fuel.
better.
I should have deferred to her.
now also the pre-K program, all the staff that is working with those students, they still have to be fingerprinted, correct?
Yes,
And that's a significant cost.
that is.
Yes, not just with that program, but that requirement went into play about 3 years ago, and we're coming up on the renewal date of that. So all staff that come in direct supervisory contact with those kids must go through an extensive state fingerprinting background in addition to what we do already to screen them for employment. So bus drivers that have preschool students that ride their bus, substitutes, we have to have a pool of those staff members so that they have the background, can be serving those students, and principals that may supervise. I mean, it goes on, and yes, it is. It's expensive at times, but it is something that we have to do for compliance.
And Sandy mentioned something that spurred my memory is the NC Pre-K grant is a dollar amount. It's just given to us, but they don't take into consideration that our benefits just went up. You know, like we're looking at a 52% benefit cost for a beginning teacher. And so those costs are not always able to capture, even though, you know, you look at what's being reimbursed to us by student based on attendance, those things, we're starting to get out of alignment there with what our state funding is providing there because of the increased benefit costs there. General operations, when you look at this and see the salary line item, that is our COA liaison position that we share with College of the Albemarle. I mentioned their the revenues that they give us for half of that position, as well as the cost for us to televise or do live broadcasting of our Board of Ed meetings. So for the time that Aaron spends setting up broadcasting, all of that is in there. This includes attorney fees, audit fees. We have postage meters, copiers, all of the software that is used at central office, so financial software, HR software. Our Power School, we have a substitute calling system. We have a part of the Power School package where we receive funds from the parents so they can do it all online. There's a reporting piece of Power School that's paid for out of this. All of our insurances, the budget, what I have done is included a 5% increase, just as an estimate. That's my best guess. The strings program, we have had an individual that has been providing the strings program for several years on a contracted basis. That program is very popular. This year, she has been all over the county, and so this budget is proposing making her an employee of the district. And you will notice there is not a significant increase from where we were with using her as a contracted employee versus bringing her in as as an employee. And so that helps us with being able to tell her where we need her, you know, she's on our schedule, and we can better manage that.
And I think it also honors the fact that she is working as hard as she is, and then she'll be
Absolutely.
eligible for benefits as well.
Yes. Athletics, our coaching supplements, this is for the supplements for provided to the coaches at all of the middle and high school, for all of those middle and high school sports. This also is where the allotment for the schools comes for their athletic targets. We also pay for Family ID, which is an electronic, it's a software that we use to capture information in regards to concussions. As you know, in the past, this district has had some audit findings because concussion paperwork wasn't completed, and this really helps make sure that we get those signatures by the dates that we need from the parents, the athletic director, that type of thing. This budget also includes fees for using the YMCA's swimming pool for the swim teams, and for reconditioning some football helmets. Utilities. There's a decrease, but in looking at what we've been spending, and I mean, we've been in school all of this year. I looked at where we were at March 31st. I annualized that, and I added 5%. That's how I came up with the number, and that's one of those you just hope and pray that that's right. You know, that there's some energy conservation somewhere, and that we've done our best guess there. Maintenance, again, I looked at where we were as of right now, and then in comparison to what we spent in the 2021 year, and came up with the budget that's there. I do think Russ has worked on some contracts, and maybe prior to his leaving, he had some cost savings in looking at some of our contracts that we have with waste management and various things like that. Repair parts and materials, that has gone down some. And as well as equipment contracted repair. When we get to capital outlay, you'll see that there's not a lot in maintenance. Maintenance has gotten several pieces of equipment over the last couple of years through capital outlay. They're pretty much, their stuff is good. And so, of course, as we get new equipment, just like with the Chromebooks, we're going to see the repair costs go down. I did include a 5% increase on custodial supplies and uniforms. That completes the operating budget. Does anybody have any questions?
Jen, can you give me a ballpark number of how many teachers represent page 2? I should have asked you that when we were on that page.
Page 2,
I'm sorry,
classroom teachers,
page 4.
that 279.5. See the positions? Out of that funding allotment, 279.5.
Okay. All right.
Is that
Yeah.
answer your question?
I was just curious, thank you.
Unless somebody just really wants to go over capital improvements, it's already been approved and submitted to the county. So if you're good, we'll go on to capital outlay. Capital outlay is where we typically do projects that are less than $50,000. That's something that was kind of established several years ago with the county. And this is where we typically put our school requests for various things. This year, the trend was furniture. You will see that for almost every school. They're wanting furniture in various capacities, whether it be new horseshoe desk, shaped desks to do small group work, collaborative tables. So like I said, the bulk of this is furniture, and these have all come direct request from the schools. Now, they request, but then maintenance goes out and says, okay, do they need this? The curriculum directors look and say, yeah, they've got a classroom that needs some new furniture or whatever. And so we do look at the requests and try to honor those, but also in trying to be good stewards of the money, make sure that it is truly a need and not a want at this time. Transportation, Alex has the activity buses on a rotation, much like we do the refresh cycle for the Chromebooks. And so we do have an activity bus there. The technology department has teacher device refreshes for both First Flight High and Cape Hatteras Elementary. And then school nutrition, various equipment that she needs at the different sites. Let's see. The next page just details what's on the first page, that's maintenance. These are projects that are overseen by our maintenance department. So the architect fees, as we look at the early college, and we have applied for some capital grant funds from the state. So getting some architects to look at some renovations at some of our schools. And so these are things that would be managed by the maintenance department. Interior painting, various schools, custodial equipment at the various schools based on who needs a scrubber this year or that type of thing. Any questions on capital outlay? Okay, school nutrition. As you all know, the summer feeding program will end June 30th. So the higher reimbursement rate that we've been receiving and being able to feed everyone at no cost will come to an end. So we will go back to the normal school lunch program where we have you pay reduced or free lunch. We're going back to the applications, that type of thing. And our receipts will be based on participation. So I did have Cte help me with this and what she projected for next year as far as revenues. Salaries, they are held to the $15 requirement. So school nutrition is going to be interesting next year as we see rising cost of food, rising cost of supplies, rising cost of labor, and reduced revenues. So we have presented a balanced budget, and we will see how that works out. We will monitor it. I mean, we're kind of held to the fire of we have all these requirements, and you've got to do it, and the kids have to be fed. So we've done our best guess, I will say that. Cte and I did work on this together, so.
I have one question about salaries. The
Sure.
same scenario where you discussed before, where now that the new number is $15, you take someone that's been working with food nutrition for 5 years, 10 years, or whatever, do they get a bump in salary
They
too?
do, and that was the whole purpose of doing the salary scales. So somebody that's been working for us 5 years, right,
same one.
we're starting to get that compression issue. We keep rising our beginning salary, and somebody that's been here for 10 years might be making $15.75 an hour, and we're getting ready to hire somebody that's never worked a day in their life in a school cafeteria making $15. And so to make that fair and equitable, we were like, okay, let's look at the salary scales. Now, the salary scales are based on the scales that are provided by the state, and that's what we did. And so in building this budget, as you can imagine, 82% of this budget is personnel. I have a massive spreadsheet with all of our staff in there based on how they're paid by PRC. We've put in the minimum $15 per hour if they're new, but then if they were here 10 years, we've put them in based on that salary scale. And then the salary scales, as we developed them, are based on current year. There will be a 2.5% increase on that. So as we make our scales match what the state does for 22, 23. So, and that's all been incorporated and accounted for in here.
That's good. I just want to make sure it was equal all the way across.
Yes. Dare County school employee is a Dare County school employee. We want to make sure they're all equitable, yes. Moving on to ASEP, if there's no other questions about school nutrition. Same thing with salaries. Ironically, there was a schedule with the ASAP, but Sandy laughs because we had different schedules, and so we have tried to be equitable with that, but we have established an ASAP after-school, we're used to the acronyms, after-school enrichment program scale that's in line with a teacher scale. These employees are paid hourly, and so we developed an hourly scale based on what a teacher assistant would be, and we have implemented that in this budget. Now, this program, Ms. LaTanya Murray wrote a grant this year for some stabilization funds, and we were awarded that grant, and we have received significant funding for that. And so that money will roll over. It has to be spent by September 30th of 2023. So if you look at this, one of the things that she proposed in her grant was to help with enhancing the playground, some of the playground equipment that is at the various schools. And so hoping to, we have playground equipment in the capital improvement plan, that maybe this can be used to supplement that, to help with getting some of our playgrounds refurbished. As I mentioned, excuse me?
I said that's a nice chunk of money to put towards.
Yes, it's been significant. We were very surprised when had no idea that that's the kind of money we would be seeing. And then the various programs that they do, so making sure they have supplies and equipment. And this program, as you know, is an enterprise program, enterprise fund program, just like school nutrition. It's supposed to be self-sustaining. And it's bare bones. They have not had a lot of equipment purchased for them, a lot of upgrades, and so we have used that grant funding, some of that grant funding this year, to help buy new cubbies at the schools. We have bought iPads to help with some of the software that they use for checking in the students and for the parents as far as making payments, that type of thing. We've also upgraded their games, upgraded just any kind of supply that they've needed. We were like, now's the time. That's what it's to be used for. We need to make sure this program gets what it needs. Any other questions? We're almost at the end. Student fees, no change. Proposal is to keep student fees as they currently are.
Yeah, I have a question about that. Has the cost, though, risen? Does this cover everything? It's stayed that way for years.
I don't see tuition on here. We increased ASAP fees 2 years ago, I believe, 3 years ago.
Well, before my time.
Right before the pandemic. We did increase our tuition fees. It hadn't changed in like 7 or 8 years. We increased it as well a couple of years ago. And quite frankly, I don't see it on here. I don't know why it's not. But currently, we charge $4,500 a year for tuition, and that is pretty much in line with what the county gives us. And then at the back is a glossary that just some of those acronyms that we throw around. If you have any questions, and just okay, maybe we look at, we had it had been like less than $4,000 for several years, and we upped it a couple of years ago, and we've maintained that. But as you said, our county formula, one of the things that is one of the components of it is the Consumer Price Index for the Southeast rural region as of February of the year, so February 22. Typically, that percentage, if it's increasing, is 1 to 2%. This year was 8.4, which is why we are seeing a significant increase. And that's based on inflation and all of that good stuff. So, are there any other questions?
Thank you. I've looked at the allotment book. It's not fun. Appreciate all your hard work.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Tilley.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Farley and the staff of preparing this budget for us to review today. It really helps us out.
Appreciate it. Thank
And
you, Candy.
We're going to be bringing this to the board next Tuesday for a vote. So if we have any other questions from any other board member?
Just
Well-
want to say thank you for all your hard work. This is always so clear and concise and very detailed. Appreciate it.
If none, I would like to request a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Have a motion by Margaret, second by Susan. Any other discussion? All in favor? Aye. Unanimous. Thank you all.